Hello again, everyone.
Hello, welcome back to Psychon.
Second video now.
Yeah?
Should be more successful. Are you ready to get your psych on?
Are you ready?
Because we're going to move on now.
Yeah.
From things that were almost psychology and started psychology to things that are actually psychology. And the thing that you'll think of when you think of psychology, Freud.
Yeah,
Lots of Freud today.
Probably one of the most well-known psychologists.
It's important to cover Freud because Freud is what started it all, but it's important to cover Freud so you know that these theories are not the ones that we work on anymore.
Yeah.
They're not accepted. Freud opened a lot of doors, but none of these doors we use anymore, they just led to other doors.
Yeah, definitely. So last week we explored obviously the origins, and we looked at how a lot of the early psychologists looked at the anatomy and how you could use the anatomy to explain behaviour. In general, the illnesses were viewed as a result of faulty anatomy, and
which couldn't help.
Yeah, couldn't be helped.
Phrenology, your brain's your skull's the wrong shape. You can't fix that without going in and boring holes in the brain, which is why you have some evidence of that in history.
Yeah, definitely. But Freud did a lot to change this, and I think that's the main contribution that we want to be discussing today.
By the 1900s, a revolution in psychology had begun, which was spearheaded by Freud, and he famously introduced his theory of psychoanalysis and the associated treatment methods with that. The main contribution of these theories was that they accounted for the patient's experiences. This is probably most well known in application to the disorder of shell shock, World War II, World War I. It's now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. In treating such individuals, psychoanalysis took into account that those suffering from shell shock had just experienced a really horrible, traumatic time before they were just called cowards. Jones notes that it was Freud who suggested that 3 factors would be involved in whether or not an individual got shell shock after the experience, including a hereditary or genetic predisposition, an unresolved infantile conflict, and the current difficulty that they faced.
The involvement of experiences in the causation of disorders led to a new treatment method. Freud first suggested that in order to cure a person of their illness, it was necessary for them to revisit the traumatic experience and express whatever emotion that they hadn't been able to express at the time. Recollection of the events, Freud initially suggested, could be achieved through hypnosis, but he later recognised that this was quite difficult, needed a lot of extensive training, and wouldn't always work. So he developed the more well-known cathartic talking therapy.
If the traumatic experience had been repressed by the patient, and Freud needed to turn to their dreams to uncover it, what he'd do is he'd get them to lay down on a sofa, as you stereotypically picture when you think about psychology, and to access their memory of the traumatic event through recording their dreams. They were then told to talk about everything that passed through their mind regarding their dreams. The therapist would have them break them down into different components, and the patient would assess each component and talk about any thoughts or memories that sprung to mind as they did so.
In Freud's original approach to dream analysis, the interpretation was actually done by the patient. The therapist was just there to coax and encourage them and to help break down the dream into its component parts. Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud, took up psychoanalysis, and he was the one who actually introduced the idea of universal symbolism, which is the idea that an object in your dream is representative of the same thing for every person in every dream.
So a good example of that would be the sort of belief that if you dream of yourself naked in front of people, that reflects your fear of public speaking. That is a Jungian thought rather than a Freud thought. Freud would say that depends on what you think it is.
Yeah.
Jung will be like, no, collective consciousness, we've all got the same deep down fears and desires and the same consciousness.
Yeah, pretty much.
Another way that Freud changed psychology was by highlighting the importance of childhood development and experiences. He introduced the 5 psychosexual stages of development to describe the different developmental challenges and their potential outcomes. These stages all focus on the libido, the psychic and emotional energy associated with instinctual biological drives. Now, whilst we use the word libido to mainly talk about sexual drives, Freud did mean biological drives. So he talks about hunger and waste disposal. So it's important not to think of his theory as
purely
sexualizing
sexual,
children, but there are definitely sexual elements in there. This could be an artifact of the fact that Freud worked in Victorian Britain where sex was a very repressed subject, so it may be that his theory was more relevant to those that he wrote about at the time than it is to us today.
Yeah.
Sex isn't that well.
It's not quite so taboo anymore.
Yes,
definitely.
at least in certain cultures and fields.
Yeah, at least in Western society.
Yeah. At least in England, where you're not Amish or something. Okay, moving on. At each stage, the child has certain needs and drives, and not meeting these demands will lead to frustration, and overindulgence can lead to other associated problems. The result of either frustration or overindulgence is the child develops a fixation on aspects of that stage, and that will ultimately shape their adult personality.
Okay. So the first of these stages is the oral stage, and it begins at birth. The oral cavity is the primary focus of libidinal energy. Frustration at this stage can stem from a mother who refuses to nurse the child on demand or who entered nursing early, and this can lead to an oral character, which is characterised by pessimism, envy, suspicion and sarcasm. Overindulgence, on the other hand, leads to a character who is optimistic, gullible and full of admiration for others around them. The primary conflict in this stage is weaning, and the stage lasts approximately 18 months.
Which is the anal stage, and that begins at approximately 18 months and coincides with the advent of toilet training. And what we see here is the first big conflict between the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is a little pleasure bot and it just enjoys shitting everywhere, and the ego and the superego are starting to take note of societal and normative pressures to control bodily functions. If the child is allowed to not use the potty, they will essentially end up with an anal expulsive character, and this is characterised by being messy, disorganised, reckless, careless, and defiant. A child who simply does not go may adopt an anal retentive character. This is neat, precise, orderly, careful, stingy, obstinate, meticulous, passive-aggressive, and this stage ends at 2 years.
Then we have the phallic stage. This is the most crucial sexual conflict in Freud's model, where the libido is focused on the genital region. The conflict here is the Oedipus or Electra complex, and involves the child's desire to possess the opposite sex parent and eliminate the same sex parent.
Possess as in, oh, not like a ghost.
Yeah, definitely. Fixation during this stage results in a phallic character, reckless, resolute, self-assured and narcissistic. Failure to resolve conflict can also result in the individual being afraid or incapable of close, loving relationships. And Freud also postulated that fixation here could be the cause of homosexuality.
One of the many reasons we don't listen to Freud.
Yeah.
Next, there is a latency period. This isn't really a psychosexual stage of development, it's almost an absence of the stage. It's a period where the sexual drive lies dormant and where sexual desires and erogenous impulses are largely repressed. Children put their libido energy into asexual pursuits such as school and same-sex relationships. It's ended at the beginning of puberty, so this is sort of end of primary school, beginning of secondary school.
Yeah, the period where they're all shouting about cooties.
Stuck in the mud. Oh, stuck in the mud.
That was a fun game.
I miss my latency period. Things are so much easier without my libido drive.
Definitely.
Which brings us nicely on to
the genital stage. This is where the child's energy returns to the genital region and interest turns to heterosexual relationships. This stage is particularly disturbed by any unresolved fixations in previous stages.
Many of Freud's theories and ideas have now largely been rejected by the psychological community. However, it cannot be denied that Freud had a big and important influence on the way that psychology changed and the way that it's practiced and how patients are viewed. He took the blame away from the individual and paid attention to the experiences they had had, which played a role in their condition.
His work on the psychosexual stages also highlighted the importance of child development and has led to an extensively researched field of developmental psychology, despite the now widely accepted inaccuracy of his theories. Thanks for watching!
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.